And that story as well will start tonight's Media Watch with Emma James. Hi there, Emma. This migration situation on the Greek-Macedonian border doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. A major talking point for all sorts of different groups and people online.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the reasons that it's not going anywhere is because of the sheer numbers involved. The UN has today confirmed that 131,000 migrants and refugees have entered Europe via the Mediterranean in just the first 2 months of this year. Now, that's more than we had in the first 5 months of 2015. So this situation really is only set to worsen. And the vast majority of them are landing in Greece, 122,000 in those 2 months at the start of 2016. Now, The Economist has drawn up a map that shows the kind of walls and barriers that are being built as a result of what is currently going on across the globe. It's an interactive map. You can click on specific countries to find out what has been built, when and why exactly it was created. And what they say is that Europe will soon have more physical barriers on its national borders than it did during the Cold War. Now, it isn't all about migration. The Ukrainian conflict is also to blame for some of these new barriers and boundaries, but it is an interesting thing to look at. However, this really is a story about images and not about numbers. And the New York Times in particular has published some very harrowing images that show just how bad the situation is on that Greek border with Macedonia as the scenes become ever more violent. And if we look at some of their other images, again, a lot of police there, a lot of tear gas, and a small child there choking on that tear gas. It's very distressing to look at. And of course, it isn't just happening in Greece. In France, too, there have been some very distressing images, as this journalist has pointed out. Something so grim and foreboding about the pictures coming in from the demolition of the Calais jungle. And it really is a very apocalyptic scene there in Calais at the moment as the dismantlement continues of the jungle in Calais. BuzzFeed too is producing plenty of images to really make you understand the extent of what's happening. And it really does, I think, bring home the horror of what is happening. And it is quite dramatic stuff. The Daily Mail, though, a British newspaper which is very much right-leaning, to say the least, is doing its best to stir up a bit of anti-migrant feeling by focusing on the fact that gangs of armed migrants were seen hijacking lorries in a desperate bid to reach Britain.
Well, that's not new, is it? Well, hijacking is a particularly inflammatory word, but migrants have been trying to get onto lorries for a long time, haven't they?
Yes, but these images involved people using weapons, basically, large sort of pieces of wood to try and smash the windows of lorries, and it really is quite frightening stuff, and it is a scary situation.
Taking it to a new level.
For the lorry drivers to find themselves in, because of course they're just trying to do their job, get to and from France, and it is proving very difficult. This photograph, I think, is probably the best piece of photojournalism I've seen on this story. A burnt-out caravan with the words "peace, love and unity" written on it, and in front is a police officer throwing a tear gas canister. Now, if you want something of an antidote to all of the horror that we are seeing with regards to the migrant crisis in Europe,
I think we all do.
Absolutely. Then I advise you to take a look at this website, theislandofalltogether.com. We have a little clip. They've created a film where they've got together basically a tourist and a refugee on the island of Lesbos. They've done it with many, many people. Let's take a look at this clip.
I'm a tourist. I'm only for 2 weeks here in Lesbos. And in 3 days we fly back to Germany.
Inshallah نجتمع هني.
You come to Stuttgart. If you're in Stuttgart, you call me with your telephone and...
أنت لطيف جدا.
And what's really striking about this video is the amount of smiling that goes on, and it really does seem that just a very simple, straightforward conversation does totally break down barriers. Now, they were provided with translations via earpieces. That's how they were able to have the conversations. But it is worth taking a look if you want to see basically something that is an antidote to everything else that we're seeing in regards to the migrant crisis right now.
Much more positive human side to that story, of course. Very interesting insight that we don't, as you say, we don't see that in the headlines. Moving on elsewhere to a rather different story. Bright lights in the sky have been getting some people very, very excited indeed. Emma, have little green men landed in Scotland?
Not quite, or so they tell us. Who knows? Maybe they are lying to us. It's the kind of story that would have played out very differently in the past, because nowadays people have the kind of technology that allows them to film pretty much anything that they happen across.
Exactly.
And dash cams in particular, cameras on board motor vehicles, seem to have captured these images very, very well indeed, and we've got some of them to show you. This site, really, if you were imagining trying to describe this to a friend, I don't think they would believe you.
Oh, wow.
There you see,
That is
basically
spectacular.
a ball of flame appearing in the sky. That's the whole area lighting up. It is quite incredible, very dramatic stuff indeed. And of course, there were people reacting on Twitter because they simply didn't know what it was that was happening here. Kim Patterson tweeted, "Proper massive rumble, ground shaking, folks seeing the sky flash blue and sirens going off everywhere. Is this the end?" she asks. A little dramatic there, perhaps. Another Twitter user, "Amazing explosion across the Cairngorms, sounded like a bomb." Now, this was seen all across the north and east of Scotland, so really very dramatic indeed. Now, a far less dramatic explanation came from the STV Scottish weatherman. Looks as if the flash has come from a meteor burning up in the atmosphere, lighting up the full sheet of cloud, sitting at around 2,000 feet.
Ah, cloud does have a use.
Absolutely, it helped it look all the more dramatic.
Thank you, bad weather.
Exactly, which is slightly disappointing almost explanation given the dramatic images that we had, but others have let their imaginations run riot. Bright lights, sonic booms everywhere, looks like the aliens have arrived in Scotland, and there's a little cartoon there that says he's one of the McMartian clan. And finally, an interesting observation. Who knew that there were so many folk with dash cams going round Scotland?
Indeed. Well, I'm almost tempted to get some kind of a surveillance system.
I know, I
myself.
feel like I'm missing out.
Exactly, pointing at the sky, see what's going on. Thanks very much, Emma James there with Media Watch. Well, today on Focus, we're returning to a topic that dominated the news at the end of last year, the environment. China's green record is notoriously poor, but authorities are moving to tackle chronic pollution. The Chinese government has set up more than 300 courts to specialise in environmental disputes. Our correspondents have been to find out what kinds of cases are being brought and how effective the courts are.
Until last year, there was a lake here. It was a peaceful place, surrounded by trees. It was one of the very few parks in Chongping, one of Beijing's suburbs. Today, the lake has been drained, and the trees have been hacked down. A real estate entrepreneur wants to create new buildings here. Ms. Guo has lived here for years. For her, the loss of the lake and the trees is an environmental crime.
It was a natural oxygen bar, and it was fantastic. Without this lake, no one is happy. Every summer we went fishing here. There are laws against this, and many neighbors are talking about it. I hope the lake can be recovered.
One NGO is suing the real estate agency, hoping to claim €1 million to help refurbish the park and the local ecosystem. This is new in Chinese law. NGOs can sue any company that's damaging the environment. These environmental crimes are looked at by the 4th Beijing Court of Justice. The verdict is expected soon, and the NGO is optimistic.
It's still a bit early, so we don't know what the outcome will be. The judgment should be delivered in the weeks to come, but we're fairly confident it will go our way.
So-called green justice in China is becoming more and more successful. This law firm is dedicated to environmental law. Its caseload is increasing rapidly. Complaints have doubled within a year. Cases of air, water, and ground pollution are coming in from all over China, prompted mostly by one case in particular. In 2014, a chemical product company was ordered to pay a fine of €22 million after being found guilty of polluting a river.
After 30 years of economic development in our country, environmental problems are becoming more severe. The consequences of pollution are becoming more obvious. More and more cases of cancer are showing up.
Have you ever been threatened by the authorities?
No, we haven't. That's because we provide legal help to people on the basis of a judicial process.
There are still many restrictions. Several cases of state collusion have been discovered. And often, local authorities try to prevent people from filing complaints.
What you see over there is a chemical factory, and that's some of the factory's wastewater found on a nearby road. But when we brought samples of this water to the Environment Protection Agency to have it analyzed by them, they did not accept it. It's common practice. As big companies are often the biggest taxpayers, local courts often rule in favor of these firms rather than the victims.
And in some cases, justice can't do anything. In the village of Zhongguan Tunxiang, around 40 people have died mysteriously over the past few years. Villagers blame the Jianshin chemical factory, saying they believe it has contaminated their underground water sources. Some villagers have tried to sue the company to get to the truth and try to receive compensation. It's a very sensitive subject in the village, and only one man agrees to talk to us, but with his identity hidden.
Several years ago, it was a real issue, and we were about to have the factory boss on trial. But the factory was shut down in no time. That was back in 2011. Now it's empty. There are no more chemicals inside. The workers have all left, and the boss is nowhere to be found.
This scenario is not uncommon. Although 20% of cultivated fields and 60% of the water in China is polluted, finding environmental justice in China remains a daunting task.
Well, do stay with us here on France 24. Coming up in the next few minutes, we will be speaking to the head of Amnesty International in Greece about the situation on the border with Macedonia. 9,500 people currently estimated to be massing there as Macedonian authorities continue to refuse to open the border crossing. Stay with us.